Hey, what's going on there, guys? Nick here from Absolute MTG, and I'm back with a sealed discussion video for you guys. So today I'm going to be using a sealed pool that I was passed at a Pro Tour qualifier event for M15. The format was 2 Journey into Nyx, 2 Born of the Gods, and 2 Theros. We are going to take a look at the deck that I ended up registering and using for 7 rounds, as well as the entire sealed pool itself, and then we're going to do kind of a discussion video based on why I chose certain things, what roles certain things have, and ultimately where I could have done better and any changes that I could have made overall. So first off, let's take a look at the actual deck that I ended up playing. So this was my sealed pool, or at least the rest of it, and this was the actual deck itself. So I ended up playing 3 colors with fixing. It was a green, white, splash blue. So the first card is Hypnotic Siren, which is a very, very good limited all-star. It's a 1/1 for 1 blue, and we can bestow it for 7, which is mainly what we want to have it here for. So it's essentially a 7-drop for us, but it's bestow for 7, 5 mana, and double blue flying. You control enchanted creature if you choose to bestow, and enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has flying. So it's a overcosted control magic that gives +1/+1 and also flying. We have Oresco's Sun Guide, so I actually ended up getting 2 of these guys, so 2/2 for 2, inspired. Whenever it becomes untapped, you gain 2 life. So 2 of these guys, 1 Phalanx Leader, so 1/1 for double white, another limited all-star. Heroic, whenever you cast a spell that targets Phalanx Leader, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Golden Hind, new creature from Journey into Nyx, 2/1 for 2 mana, taps for 1 green to our mana pool. It accelerates us along and allows us to play bigger things like our turn 5 cards on turn 4. Leaf Crown Dryad, I've mentioned this in numerous videos, but dual modal creatures are extremely good in this limited format. So it's a 2/2 for 2 mana, but usually we're going to want to bestow it for 4 mana, and with that, enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has reach, and the creature itself, the Leaf Crown Dryad, has reach. We have Satyr Hedonist, which Satyr Hedonist, I had the option to play Satyr Grove Dancer, I believe it's called, the one from Journey in the Nyx. It's in my sealed pool and we'll get to it later, but I had the option to play that card or Satyr Hedonist, and ended up playing the Satyr Hedonist just with the off chance of being able to play Karametra's Favor, tap for red mana, sack the Satyr Hedonist for red, and add 3 red to my mana pool and accelerate me along on the off chance that I was missing land drops and still needed to play a 5-drop. So that was my mindset with this card. Like, it kind of helps you in situations, but 2/1 for 2, 1 red, sack it, and add 3 red to your mana pool. Really good card in red-green monsters, especially when it was just Born of the Gods and Theros. I would love drafting this card because it would easily accelerate you into cards like Nessian Asp, or Nessian Asp really quick, just because on turn 3 you could crack the Hedonist for 3 mana and you hit all of your land drops and you just play Nessian Asp and then be able to grind out games. And then you would just kind of hope that your opponent didn't have Asphyxiate or something like that. But we also had Elite Skirmisher as a 2-of, so off of Heroic we get to tap down a creature, and he's a 3/1 for 3 mana. We have Wingsteed Rider, so 2/2 for 3 flying heroic. Whenever you cast a spell that targets it, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Nyxborn Wolf, again dual modal creature. Enchanted creature gets +3/+1. It's a 3/1 creature for 3 with bestow for 5. Nyxborn Triton, another card that I splashed for blue. And basically with green-white, I was pretty low on creatures. Usually with sealed, I like to have around 15 or 16 creatures. Sometimes I may go a little bit lower, maybe 14 or 15 if I'm playing heroic, but that's pretty much just so I have more heroic interactions. But Nyxborn Triton was definitely splash worthy. It's a 2/3 creature for 3, and we can bestow it for 5, and enchanted creature gets +2/+3, which is just great. It's kind of like the Nyxborn Wolf. Both of the cards are pretty solid whenever it comes to commons with bestow. We have Ravenous Lucricata, so 2/4 for 4 mana, Vigilance, and Monstrous 3 for 7 mana. Prophet of Kruphix, another reason to splash for that blue. Untap all creatures and lands you control during each other player's untap step. You may cast creature cards as though they had flash. which was extremely relevant pretty much all throughout the event. Just being able to flash in things and even just untap your lands and then have a instant speed spell like Phalanx Formation or something like that. Nessian Demoloch, so 3/3 for 5. Tribute 3 whenever it enters the battlefield. If the tribute wasn't played, destroy target non-creature permanent. So the role that Nessian Demoloch plays is either land destruction or enchantment destruction. So with enchantment destruction, you can destroy things like Fearsome Temper or any bestow creatures that are being used as a aura on one of your opponent's creatures. Like if they go to bestow something to give it like +2/+2 or +3/+1 or something like that, you can blow it up with Nessian Demoloch, which is great. It also blows up artifacts, so any of the troublesome artifacts that you may encounter that give something beneficial to your opponent's creatures if they equip or whatnot, or even, well, Siren Song Leer also equips, but Siren Song Leer is also a very good one that you can blow up. But Nessian Demoloch is pretty good even just whenever your opponent's playing a 2 or 3 color deck and you want to take them off of their access to a certain color or another. Snake at the Golden Grove, so just one of 4/4 for 5, Tribute 3, and whenever it enters the battlefield, if the Tribute wasn't paid, we gain 4 life. Now moving into the non-creature spells that we have. One Glimpse of the Sun God, tap X creatures, scry 1 for X and 1 white. Really good for manipulating the way that your opponent has blockers. You can tap down their creatures and swing alpha. Also another interesting thing is with Heroic. So whenever you attack with your heroic creatures, whenever you're in declare attackers, a fun thing to do is to use Glimpse of the Sun God and tap your opponent's creatures, but also with access mana, go and tap your own creatures, your own heroic creatures, because they're already tapped. It's mainly just a matter of getting the triggers for heroic, and the Glimpse of the Sun God would be targeting our Phalanx leader and would trigger off their heroic and would manipulate it in that way, and it actually did end up being very relevant to do that multiple times. So one Glimpse of the Sun God, keep that in mind, because I think that's something that a lot of newer players overlook with a card like Glimpse of the Sun God. Because your creature's already tapped and attacking, tapping them actually does not do anything. So Johnny's Presence, Strive for 3, cost of just 1. And any number of target creatures each gain +1/+1 indestructible until the end of the turn. Again, really good for heroic. That's what R&D intended for Strive to be. It was a heroic enabler. One God's Willing, so target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until the end of the turn. Scry 1 for 1 white. One Traveler's Amulet. This was actually, I actually ended up playing a 41 card deck, and Traveler's Amulet was the card that just brought it up to 41. It searches for basic lands, it fixes for me, and there's really not a downside to playing a 41 card deck if that card you're adding in is Traveler's Amulet to fix for you, which ended up being so relevant so many times. Just getting that second blue to be able to bestow Hypnotic Siren was just great with Traveler's Amulet. Also Ordeal of Nylea, which makes the splash much more viable, especially with heroic creatures. So enchantment for 2, enchant creature, whenever the enchanted creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then if it has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, sacrifice Ordeal of Nylea. Whenever we do so and sack it, we search our library for up to 2 basic lands and put them on the battlefield tapped. The majority of the time I would not have any blue mana whenever I'd crack Ordeal. It would just be for the 2 islands that I'm playing in the deck. One Karametra's Favor. So again, like I talked about the interaction with Satyr Hedonist, you can tap a creature for red, sack the Hedonist, then add 3 red to your mana pool to be able to do something. Usually it's accelerating if you're missing land drops, which is very convenient unless your opponent has removal for the creature you're ramping into. However, I mean, I don't think that it ended up being relevant more than just once. There was really only one time where I was land screwed where the Hedonist ended up being relevant, but Karametra's Favor nonetheless is just really good in this deck because it does fix for us, it draws us a card and cantrips itself, and it accelerates us along, which is always pretty good. So enchanted creature for 2 mana, whenever Karametra's Favor enters the battlefield, we draw a card. Enchanted creature has tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Then we have Phalanx Formation, so instant speed 3 cost, Strive for 2. Any number of target creatures each gain double strike until the end of the turn. Johnny, Mentor of Heroes. Yeah, I did end up pulling him, and Greg and Dan both went along with me for this event, and they both joked that we would pull a Johnny in our pools that we had to register for somebody else, and then we would have to pass him along. And funny enough, I ended up getting a Johnny in my sealed pool, and of course I'm going to play him. He's just so broken in limited. So 4 loyalty, 5 cost, +1 distribute 3 +1/+1s among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures you control. +1, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an aura, creature, or planeswalker from among them and put it into your hand. The rest on the bottom of your library in any order. -8, gain 100 life. So basically with a Johnny, it would just be either the first +1 or the second +1. By the time I got to 8, my opponent just scooped. There was just absolutely no way. Anytime that I played him, he was just absolutely absurd. But anytime I didn't see him, it was a little bit more rough of a time. And I actually didn't see him way too often. But the games where I didn't see him, most times it was kind of all right. It was just a pretty fair match. But anytime I did see him, it was just absolutely overkill. And Johnny is the whole reason why whenever I was X and O going into round 4, I ended up beating a godsend. So Johnny was just absolutely great. I also ended up pulling a Temple of Plenty in my sealed pool, which ended up helping with mana fixing, and just having a Scryland in general that's on color is very great. So enters the battlefield tapped, and whenever it enters the battlefield, scry 1. And then our basic lands. So I ended up playing 8 basic planes, and I had them split between 4 and 4 of this artwork. So 8 planes, I think 5 forests. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 forests. So 6 forests and 2 islands. So that gives us 17 lands total, 41 cards back, and the 41st card is Traveler's Amulet, which is totally okay for us. So that's what we ended up playing. Now what I want to actually do is to kind of discuss where else I could have gone, because as you guys can see, I only splashed for 3 colors here. The other thing that I could have potentially splashed for was black. However, with black, it wouldn't really have been for creatures, and that's kind of what I was aiming for. Like, I really needed more creatures. Hypnotic Siren's kind of like a 7-drop, if you want to call it. So it was basically like I was splashing for 2 creatures in blue, the Nyxborn Triton and the 5-drop Prophet of Kruphix. But the other color that I could have gone for was black, splashing for Reaper of the Wilds, and also splashing for anything like Cutthroat Maneuver. Blood Soul Harpy would have been alright. Weight of the Underworld is there, and Lash of the Whip. So I could have gone for more removal with like Weight of the Underworld, Lash of the Whip, and Reaper of the Wilds. Even Cutthroat Maneuver or Blood Soul Harpy are pretty alright, but Blood Soul Harpy just kind of on its own is a little bit more awkward. It's not really the best limited card, but it's still pretty alright. I did have Blood Crazed Hoplite and Read the Bones, but ultimately with my splash, I want to be getting value for the cards that I'm splashing in. Like Reaper of the Wilds is absolutely fine. It's a very good card to be splashing in a deck, and it's just really powerful. It can gain Death Touch, and it has the ability to give itself hexproof at any point in time. Whenever other creatures die, we get to scry 1. However, with the cards that I did splash in blue, you'll notice Nyxborn Triton is dual modal. He can be used for 5 mana to bestow one of my creatures and make it bigger. Prophet of Kruphix, of course, is just really good because it allows me to play more things in a variety of different turns, just because I get to untap my lands and have more tricks and stuff going on. But Hypnotic Siren just ultimately to take my opponent's creatures. Now, given that I just mentioned that we had that potential splash there, let's go and look at the other things. So the other cards that I had in green and white that didn't make the cut, and then to just break apart this deck and discuss colors in general and why I didn't go for certain things. So Setessan Battle Priest is pretty alright, but it's for a heroic creature, it's pretty plain. I actually don't really like this card very much, just because it doesn't get bigger with heroic. It does let us gain 2 life, and I did side it in for one of the matches that I lost against Red-White Heroic, and the guy that I played against ended up going 7-0 and ended up getting into top 8 very easily with a sealed pool that completely surpasses any draft deck that I've ever had in Red-White Heroic. He had 2 Annex Insimity, Eroas, I think multiple Satyr Nyx Smiths. Like, his deck was just absolutely absurd. Setessan and Battle Priest ended up siding in for that matchup just because I want so much life gain and I want to counteract any quick-paced stuff that's going on. Fonts of Vigor really isn't playable for us. Hold at Bay is somewhat playable. Again, it's another card that sides in against hyper-aggressive decks, especially if they kind of have this all-in-one type of barrage, like if they have like multiple Titan strengths that they enjoy playing in one given turn. Hold that base pretty good. It prevents 7 damage that would be dealt to target creature or player this turn, so it was more of a sideboard tech card. Same with Revoke Existence, so exile target artifact or enchantment. I chose not to play it in my main board just because I was a little bit more cut on playing more powerful instant and sorcery speed spells. However, I did side into Revoke Existence against my opponent that was playing Pharika, which was extremely good, but I also got to get rid of like Archetype of Courage, and I think there was another card that I got to get rid of it. I think it was just Archetype of Courage was game 2, and then game 3 I think it was the Pharika that I got to get rid of. Yeah, that sounds about right. But otherwise, Revoke Existence really didn't side in that much. It wasn't really as relevant because people were playing a whole lot more just non-enchantment based creatures throughout the entirety of the event. I also have Oppressive Raise. So Oppressive Raise sides in for quicker paced decks. I don't like it for any matchup where the game will elongate to the point where my opponent does have the mana to be able to pay. But if my opponent is going like kind of all in on a heroic type deck where I can just invest 1 mana to make my opponent tap 3 and completely throw himself off of what he can do in a given turn, Oppressive Raise is really good, just because, I mean, you lock them out of their access to be able to do more, and you pin them with the choice of being able to actually attack for the turn, or to develop a board state, or to just develop their creature and make it bigger. So Oppressive Raise is really good up against hyper-aggressive decks. Up against slower decks, it's not really as good, and that's pretty much why I didn't want to play its main board. Vanquish the Foul, destroy target creature with power 4 or greater, and scry 1 for 6. It's a little bit too slow. The card's still really fine. Would I have rather it been like Reprisal or something like that? Yeah, probably, and I probably would have played it. However, Vanquish the Foul is just pretty slow at a 6-drop slot, so I didn't end up playing it. I actually didn't end up siding in it at all. And Last Breath is mainly for those heroic decks again. So exile target creature with power 2 or less, its controller gains 4. So again, another sideboard tech card. Out of green, Nature's Panoply really didn't appeal to me. Choose any number of target creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on them. Strive for 3, regular cost for 1 green. The card's pretty alright, but with the heroic enablers that we already had, they were pretty much just better than Nature's Panoply. Crewfix's Insight pretty much wasn't playable for us. It wasn't really relevant. The Satyr Grove Dancer, which was the card that I said could have replaced the Satyr Hedonist, but I ultimately ended up siding with the Satyr Hedonist with the off chance of the situation that I described. But Satyr Grove Dancer would have probably been just fine as a replacement for it. Setessan Starbreaker to destroy auras as a 2/1 for 4 mana. Didn't end up siding it in. Bestow creatures weren't as relevant. So that's the green-white. That's the green-white analysis for the rest of the cards that I didn't play. Out of blue, cards that I did kind of consider were Breaching Hippocamp, which I didn't end up playing for a splash. Voyage's End, which could have been okay. Return target creature to its owner's hand and scry 1. Divination's pretty alright, but it's kind of leading and tapering away from the splash that we have. Oracle's Insight is pretty great, especially with like heroic creatures, just being able to, if you can't attack with them, if your opponent does something to like tap them down or something like that, go and sudden storm them, then you can respond and scry 1 and draw a card for the turn, something like that. But it is a heroic enabler nonetheless. Evanescent Intellect, which definitely is not playable for us. So that's kind of the overlook of those 3 colors. Now let's break this apart. So break it apart and take a look at the colors individually and talk about what cards are actually playable, aside from the obvious like a Johnny. What cards are playable and which ones are not for consideration of choosing a color. So Temple of Plenty is our only, I think only dual land, or only non-basic land that we had yet. So only non-basic land right there. Our black is there. We have blue. Red was pretty alright. I considered it for a while to actually play the red just because I had 2 Sigiled Skinks. There was also Fanatic of Mogus in there, which Fanatic of Mogus was a little bit more unplayable just because in a like it's just not a card that you play in a splash because it's very dependent on red devotion. You can definitely build and draft a very good deck around Fanatic of Mogus. Or at least you could, because before it was triple Theros, and then even Born of the Gods Theros was a little bit more viable for that. But 1 Journey, 1 Born, 1 Theros, it's a little bit more sketchy to draft around Fanatic of Mogus, or in the hopes of getting a Fanatic of Mogus or anything like that. But Fanatic of Mogus is a very synergetic card that you need to have a certain type of deck to be able to be in a position where it will actually give you a very large benefit or anything like that. So multicolored cards here. Then we're just going to put the Amulets and Deserter's Quarters with the dual lands, Phalanx Formation, and the rest of the green cards. So now to take an overlook of everything in general. So we have Deserter's Quarters, so it's a 2-cost artifact. We can choose to not untap it during our untap steps, and 6-mana tap. Tap target creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step for as long as Deserter's Quarters remains tapped. So it's a very easy way to lock out 1 creature, but it's extremely expensive at investing 8 mana to tap 1 creature and essentially not being able to do it in 1 turn, more so than anything else. It's very good for any deck that is pretty slow-paced. Being able to single out 1 card that your opponent has and to tap it down is pretty alright. Traveler's Amulet, of course, is pretty playable in most all decks. It just fixes for you, and it replaces itself, and it thins your deck out as well. And Temple of Plenty, even if I wasn't playing green-white necessarily, like let's say I was playing red-white, I would still play this Temple because it's Scry. The Temple of Plenty replaces the Plains, or if I was playing like green-red, I would replace a forest in calculating my mana. The Scry lands are just so important, and Scry in general is extremely important. So let's talk about black, because black was a color that we talked about being able to potentially splash for, but we didn't end up siding for it. Cards that are actually good in black. Champion of Stray Souls is pretty good. Grizzly Transformation is fairly good as well. It's more of a card that I tend to deem filler than anything else. The Intimidate factor of it is alright. Being able to cantrip is just fine. However, it's more of a filler card than anything else for me. Gray Merchant, of course, is very good, but it's like Fanatic, where you have to have a decent splash of, or well, not a splash, a decent base of black to be able to capitalize on the card. War Chanter of Mogus is a little bit more iffy. I really don't like the card. Lash of the Whip is just fine. Weight of the Underworld is okay unless you're playing against Heroic, because Heroic creatures can just surpass that -3, -2. Read the Bones is great. Blood Crazed Hoplite, Heroic gets +1/+1 off of Heroic, and whenever a +1/+1 is placed on him, remove a +1/+1 from target creature and opponent controls. Really fine. It's a counter Heroic card. Bloodtoll Harpy is just fine. Cutthroat Maneuver, Aspect of Gorgon is great, +1/+3 and Death Touch. Feast of Dreams, destroy target enchanted creature or enchantment creature. And Nyx Infusion, +2/+2 or -2/-2 to a creature. +2/+2 as long as it's an enchantment, otherwise -2/-2. Dual modal card again. Forsaken Drifter is pretty much not playable. And Ashiok's Adept, I don't think that I've ever played this card. Heroic, you make your opponent discard a card, but it's actually a card that I really just kind of hate out of Born of the Gods, to be honest. So we did have some playable things out of black, definitely some playable stuff. Could we have potentially gone for more black in the green-white deck? We could have. At a certain point in time, you kind of tend to neglect one aspect or another of your deck if you're trying to do that. We could have potentially dropped the entire Heroic aspect of the deck and dropped playing some smaller things to, in exchange, be able to play cards like Lash of the Whip and Weight of the Underworld, and kind of fill those Heroic slots with cards like Bloodtoll Harpy and maybe Blood Crazed Hoplite, or like the Gray Merchant of Asphodel. The thing about the green-white deck that I drafted is it was still fairly slow. Like, you weren't really doing anything in the early game, and at least your smaller creatures would deter any opponent from wanting to swing and trade their small creatures into it, or it would even give you chump blockers in the early turns that you could follow up with like big creatures later on. So I think going for a slower deck is usually kind of the wrong thing to do with what we were trying to build with our deck, and I think usually I just kind of want to be as fast as possible with this type of a limited format. The format's fairly slow, and if you could try to find something aggressive in there, it's usually going to do fairly well most of the time. And trying to slow down your deck even more is just kind of potentially a bad thing to do. But ultimately, just analyzing cards just for what they are, like Lash of the Whip, Weight of the Underworld, Nyx Infusion, Feast of Dreams, like those are all fantastic cards. Feast of Dreams probably being the best card out of here, just because it hits so many things in the format. It hits just so many bestow creatures, or even if your opponent puts like an Ordeal or Mortal Obstinacy or something on a creature, you just get the Feast of Dreams and get rid of it. It's definitely a very high-end draft pick, and I've drafted it so many times in Journey, Born, Theros. It's just fantastic. But that is our analysis for black and black cards that are playable ultimately. Out of blue, of course, Nyxborn Triton, Hypnotic Siren, and, well, Prophet of Kruphix is over there. God Hunter Octopus. It's an RA card, 5/5 for 6. It can't attack unless defending player controls an enchantment or an enchanted permanent, which is just fine. I mean, look at the block that we're in, look at the card quality that we have. Usually God Hunter Octopus is going to be active for us. However, it's another 6-drop. It's just kind of slow, but ultimately it's a fine card. I actually don't mind building a sealed deck with this card in there. Interpret the Signs, scry 3, reveal the top card of your library, draw cards equal to the CMC for 6 mana. It's a little bit costly for what it does. It's just kind of like Thassa's Bounty pretty much at that point for me. Stymied Hopes, show your opponent a Stymied Hopes they're going to worry for a game. And I mean, I don't know. Stymied Hopes, I really just never liked this card. It's a Force Spike, but I mean, for 2 mana, you do still get the scry one, even if they do pay the mana off of it. But usually, you're getting it off of opponents that are playing a greedy land base and are playing exact mana things all the time, or are doing multiple things per turn. You can kind of get the benefit on your opponent from that. But I usually don't like Stymied Hopes. Kind of same thing with Coastline Chimera. I don't really like the card very much. Rise of Eagles in a slower deck is pretty good. Put 2/2/2 bird enchantment creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield, scry 1. With Thassa's Devourer, that lets you get 2 triggers off of 2 enchantments entering the battlefield, and you get to mill them, which is pretty good, so keep that in mind for limited synergies. Rise of Eagles and Thassa's Devourer is pretty good, and Thassa's Devourer is a common, which you could find it pretty easily. Font of Fortunes, so essentially like Divination, but for 1 extra mana. You do get to separate it between 2 turns, where you're investing 2 mana on 1 turn and 2 mana on a following turn to actually be able to use the card itself. Cloaked Siren, Flash Flying, pretty solid card overall, 3/2 for 4. Pretty plain flyer for blue. Breaching Hippocamp, 3/2 for 4 flash, enters the battlefield, untap another target creature you control. I like this card in green-blue mainly just because in green-blue you are playing with big fatty creatures that you can untap and use as blockers, or even flyers that you can use as blockers as well. And that's pretty much where I like to have Breaching Hippocamp the most. Just any deck where you can take advantage of big creatures that you're swinging with, and maybe your opponent doesn't block them the first time around because they want to still save their creatures, but then they're trying to swing with a few things on their own turn. Hippocamp can manipulate for you. Voyage's End is also extremely good. Return target creature to its owner's hand and scry 1 for 2 mana. Pretty much like kind of the same thing as Hubris in Journey in the Nyx, except Hubris allows you, instead of the scry 1, to return auras that are attached to that creature, so any bestow creatures or anything like that. So Voyage's End is just fine. Divination as well, just fine. Draw 2 cards for 3 mana. Oracle's Insight to enchant a creature and give it scry 1, then draw a card for 4 mana. Just being able to draw an extra card each and every single turn off of like maybe a blocker that you have. I don't know, like maybe one of your smaller creatures like Omen Speaker. If you go Omen Speaker turn 2, turn 4, Oracle's Insight, just be able to use it as a blocker and also be able to draw more cards per turn is just great. And Evanescent Intellect, like I mentioned before, is just kind of relatively bad. I really don't like the card, and it really doesn't serve a purpose most times. So that is our blue and the sum up for ultimately kind of what's playable out of blue. So we did still have a fair bit of blue cards that pretty much just worked. Now out of red. So red, Flamespeaker's Will is a little bit more unplayable than anything. It only hits artifacts, which kind of sucks because Mortal Obstinacy is so relevant, and that's the counterpart to that card. But Sigiled Skink is very good. We pulled 2 of them, and I mean, Sigiled Skink is just great. 2/1 for 2 mana. Whenever it attacks, scry 1. If you're able to make it big and keep it around for a while, you're just going to get more perpetual scry 1 triggers, which is awesome. So 2 of these guys, very limited playable. Flamespeaker's Will, it's kind of alright. Like, if you were playing a red-white heroic deck, I would end up just kind of playing this card. And usually in a draft, you'll end up picking up a few of them, just because it's a lower-end pick. But Enchanted Creature gets +1/+1, triggers off heroic if need be. Whenever Enchanted Creature deals combat damage to a player, you may sack it and destroy an artifact. Sometimes may be relevant for like a Deserter's Quarters, Siren Song Leer, Gorgon's Head, something like that. Fearsome Temper, very playable. +2/+2 to Enchanted Creature for 3 mana, and it has 3 mana. Target creature can't block this. Target creature can't block this creature this turn. So you get to manipulate blockers that your opponent has for blocking that said big creature. Spearpoint Oread, another fantastic creature that is dual modal. 6 cost to bestow, 3 cost to actually play it. First strike, Enchanted Creature gets +2/+2 and has first strike. Ill-Tempered Cyclops, 3/3 for 4. Trample, Monsters 3 for 6. Again, another very playable card. Let's move the Flamespeaker's Will to the back. Nyxborn Wildcard is pretty alright. There's a certain type of deck that you want to have with Nyxborn Wildcard, like red-white heroic or red-white aggro, where you're actually going to have use out of a turn to bestow on like your 1-drop creature, like one of your Satyr Hoplites or something like that, to make it a 3/3. But Nyxborn Wildcard, again, there's a certain time and place to play Nyxborn Wildcard, but usually that time is not always, and the deck type is not every. So we'll move that to the back. Fanatic of Mogus deals damage to each opponent equal to your devotion to red, 4/2 for 4. Usually it's just a fine card as a 4-drop 4/2, but that actual ability itself is what wins you games more times than none. So Fanatic, definitely playable. Rage of Perforos, deal 4 damage to target creature, can't be regenerated this turn. And scry 1 for 5 mana, pretty alright. Boulder Fall, definitely unplayable. Peak Corruption, more times than unplayable. Destroy target mountain, deals 3 damage to that land's controller for 3 mana. If your opponent's playing maybe like a splash of red, or they're playing 2 colors, one of those being red, and they're playing Chained to the Rocks, sure, go for it. Otherwise, I don't really see a need to play Peak Corruption. Messenger's Speed, Enchanted Creature has Trample and Haste. Alright, and a Heroic Enabler, otherwise, no. Reckless Reveler, more so filler than anything. 2/1 for 2 mana. 1 red, sack it, and destroy target artifact. So again, I mean, artifacts really aren't as relevant in this block, but whenever you do get in the situation where you need to get rid of one, a Reckless Reveler can do the job for you, but more so it's kind of like a filler card than anything else. Blinding Flare, 1 red, any number of target creatures can't block this turn, strive for 1 red. Very, very good. Font of Ire, 2 mana to play, 4 mana to sack it and deal 5 damage to target player. It's alright, it's more filler than anything. Rollick of Abandon, sorcery speed, 5 cost, all creatures get +2/-2 until the end of the turn, is actually an extremely playable removal spell, which may not seem like something that it actually is. I've had limited experience with this card where I would cite it in as a Pyroclasm. It's a 5 mana Pyroclasm. That could potentially set myself up for a Alpha Strike that could be lethal, or it could be very close to lethal. The -2 is something that is worth noting whenever you're playing against a deck that is producing like multiple 2/2s, like maybe your opponent plays Revel of the Fallen God to make 4 haste 2/2s, then Rollick of Abandon ends up being extremely relevant at getting rid of any of them. but it also makes any of your bigger creatures, in which I don't... Do we have any big? Oh, well, we have Ill-Tempered Cyclops. It'll make like an Ill-Tempered Cyclops 2 power bigger, and definitely relevant with that trample. But Relic of Abandon is definitely very good, and it's a card to look out for whenever you're sideboarding. Maybe you don't play it in your main board. Maybe in your sideboard it's a card that could end up being a board wipe. Did we talk about green? I don't think we talked about green. No, we did. No, we didn't talk about green. So I'm starting to lose it already because this video is going on for so long. I've forgotten what we've covered and what we haven't covered. We've pretty much just gone this way. Citizen Starbreaker, it's a sideboard tech card whenever it comes down to you playing against a lot of bestow creatures, or even just auras that your opponent's playing, just putting pans on their creatures. Satyr Grove Dancer, more filler than anything, but could be playable as a 2-drop. If you're trying to find filler slots, it's alright. Krufix's Insight. If you're playing very enchantment heavy, this card is great just because it digs for the top 6 cards of your library. You can put 3 enchantments from among them into your hand, the rest into your graveyard. So it's just fine. I mean, again, it's a certain card for a certain deck. Nature's Panoply, if you're playing Green-White Heroic or anything like that, Nature's Panoply is just fine. But in the deck that I drafted, in the deck that I submitted, I didn't play it just because I had better Heroic Enablers ultimately, but Nature's Panoply is just, it's pretty alright. So Nature's Panoply, Golden Hind, just very good limited all-star. It's a ramper, it's a 2/1 for 2 that ramps for 1 green. Leafground Dryad, again, dual modal creatures are just fine and dandy. Satyr Hedonist is probably one of my more favorite cards from Theros that helps us ramp. I have a soft spot for this card just because I've had so many instances where I've been able to play a turn 3 5-drop off of this card, and anytime that it's not answered, you just get this really good feeling about it. So Satyr Hedonist, personally, I think it's a fantastic card, especially if you're red-green. Nyxborn Wolf, fairly solid card. Usually it's not really, like, even in the filler realm, it's just a really good card as a 5-drop bestow. Ravenous Lugerkrata, definitely very good and very much more of a high-end pick out of green in Journey into Nyx. Nessian Demoloch, just pretty solid. Being able to blow up things or give your opponent the option to make him a 6/6, or you get to blow up one of their lands or one of their bestow creatures or something. Snake of the Golden Grove, pretty much same way for gaining life or making it a 7/7. Ordeal of Annihilea to pretty much just interact with your deck. All of the ordeals are good. None of them are bad. Each one has its purpose, and each one just makes your creatures bigger and gives you some kind of ulterior benefit once you reach those counters. Kirametra's Favor, also playable just because it lets you mana fix, and it also cantrips itself, so it replaces itself. So our green did have plenty of playable things in it. So all of our colors pretty much just had playable things. It's really just a matter of what's going to synergize well. Then for white, so let's do what I probably should have been done and just separate these from the start with cards that I look to build a deck around immediately, and then just kind of separate the rest of them out there. So Phalanx Formation, Revoke Existence is just fine. Oppressive Raise, Vanquish the Foul is kind of higher end for the no section. Same with Last Breath. Glimpse of the Sun God is usually what I just grab immediately and try to play. It's just a really good card. Johnny's Presence is fine. God's Willing, the double Elite Skirmisher, Wingsteed Rider, the double Resco Sun Guide, and the Phalanx Leader. All these cards are just fine. For the rest of these things, it's pretty much just, it's really narrow. Like the Vanquish the Foul may end up being more narrow than it seems in the games that you play, so it may end up being better off as a sideboard tech card. Same with Last Breath. Yeah, you never want to make an assumption for what any field of opponents that could randomly be playing things that you could hit. Hold at Bay, again, it's narrow and you don't really need it, but whenever you do need it, it's pretty worthy of a sideboard slot and something that can side in for you. Otherwise, the other things that we had in whites, like the Phalanx Formation, Presence, God's Willing, Skirmisher, Wingsteed Rider, Sun Guides, and Phalanx Leader, these are all cards that just catch my eye immediately. And Glimpse of the Sun God, like, just looking at these cards, this is already a good base in white. This is already somewhere where we want to start in white that will actually work for us. It'll actually work, and it's not a bad place to just kind of have a white shell that we can work around. And with the land-based and land distribution that I had, I definitely wanted to emphasize white a little bit more, just so I could hit those Phalanx leaders on turn 2 if need be, or maybe even hit it on like turn 3, being able to play like Oresco's Sun Guide, play Favor on it on turn 3 while hitting a land drop, pay the 2 mana for the Favor, maybe have a Plains out there already, and tap the Oresco's Sun Guide and the Plains to play Phalanx Leader, which was actually literally exactly the case that happened in one of my games, because I had 1 green, 1 white, I top decked an island and had to do exactly that maneuver to play the Phalanx Leader on turn 3. So that is our white. And then the last section is our multicolored stuff. Ragemonger is usually pretty awful unless you are drafting it alongside a bunch of Minotaurs, or you have a massive amount of Minotaurs and you have the red-black lord out of Theros, which I can't think of what the name of it is, or multiple of the haste Minotaur, the haste 4/2. Whenever it comes in the battlefield, gets +2/+0. It's a 2/2 for 3. Or even just like Borderland Minotaurs. It even makes like Fanatic of Mogus cost a little bit less. It's an alright card, but it's usually just kind of more awkward than not. As far as Enlightenment is, it's a very good card. Like, I really like this card, and I actually may have played it in my actual deck that I had going on here, but I wasn't really tempted to have to play this type of a card. Maybe it would have been better than one of the other cards that we had, but in retrospect, I don't think I would have cut a God's Willing or a Johnny's Presence to play in Afara's Enlightenment. Could I have cut another creature? Yeah, maybe, but that puts me in the position where I'm running less creatures, and that could be awkward for the probability of getting a creature in my opening hand and early on, and not having a handful of like 5-drop creatures or something like that. But Afara's Enlightenment is just great. I mean, it's a fantastic card. It's extremely playable. Enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Enchanted Creature. Enchanted Creature has flying, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may return Afara's Enlightenment into its owner's hand. So, Afara's Enlightenment, just very fantastic. Reaper of the Wilds, again, very fantastic for red-green X that you want to be drafting. Whenever another creature dies, scry 1 for 1 black Death Touch for 2 mana, 1 green, hexproof. Fantastic. Ajani, again, very playable, and Prophet of Kruphix, pretty playable for us in green-blue, and it can absolutely sway a game, or even just completely put your opponent on their toes for what you could potentially be playing, and the fear of you actually flashing in a creature at instant speed to block what your opponent's doing. But again, like, the changes that I could have probably made were maybe playing the Afara's Enlightenment, maybe dropping Heroic for playing black, which I think would have probably have been a worse option than any of the ones that I had. I could have gone a little bit deeper for blue to play something like Breaching Hippocamp, but ultimately, like, I think the blue splash would have still been a little bit more limited to just a splash itself. Otherwise, I was pretty happy with how I did. I ended up going 4-3 and getting 22nd place out of 90-something people. I think it was like 97 or something like that people, which is pretty alright. I'm okay with the way that I did, even though it was just 4-3. It is a Pro Tour qualifier event, and the decks that I lost to were actually all aggro. The 3 decks that I lost to were aggro. Which was kind of annoying, just because I got outraced. I had a very strong start in the early rounds, and then it just kind of tapered off with losing to aggro. But ultimately, it was all right. Every single time you get to play limited, it's a experience where you just kind of build your knowledge of a certain format, or even just of limited in general, and you just kind of get better. You progressively get better at limited with more of it that you play, and you just kind of get the knowledge of these obscure interactions of cards, and this overall different way of looking at cards and different way of looking at how different things work together that will ultimately prepare you for another event. It will make you more prepared whenever new cards come out, and then maybe you'll see different strategies or different things that are going on that could work very well together. But again, definitely not disappointed with a 4-3. Greg was actually 5-2 at the end of the event. He got top 16. He was playing red-white heroic. He was playing a red-white aggro deck, and aggro is just really good. It's really good in this format. The format's pretty slow. Anytime you can force aggro is pretty alright. Usually you don't have too much of a hard time with playing against like bigger end creatures, because usually you're the one that's just turning things sideways and making your creatures big and heroic as it is anyway. But yeah, it's definitely, it's also very useful to go back and actually take a look at your sealed pool and try to look and pinpoint what you could have done better, and if there were any areas that you really just kind of overlooked things and you could have emphasized on certain things more than others. But ultimately, even just looking back over the sealed pool, I think I still did a fairly good job at building my deck, and especially with like the time restriction that you do have, where it's not as lenient as a like local level Magic sealed event or anything like that. Pro Tour qualifier events are extremely serious. They're extremely competitive, and it's pretty much like the apex of competitiveness. Otherwise, it's rivaled to like a Grand Prix event or even a Pro Tour event itself. They're extremely competitive, and everybody's trying to do well. Everybody is bringing their A game to one of these events, and ultimately you have to be really cautious. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be able to play your deck right and be able to know how things interact, where triggers go, be able to call out all of your heroic triggers and whatnot. But I would suggest for anybody that plays sealed, after you get done with a sealed event, even if you do really well, even if you win the event, go back, take a look at your sealed deck, see what you could have done better, because chances are there may have been 1 or 2 cards that you overlooked, or 1 or 2 bad judgment calls that you had with building your deck that you could have probably done better with. And there's probably 1 or 2 for me as well. Nobody is absolutely perfect at limited, and it's pretty much just gradual for how much you're going to improve on it and get better over time. So I thank you guys for joining me for this sealed discussion video. It wasn't really a kind of like, oh hey, I'm going to open packs and put a deck together. It was more of just like, here's what I was given in a Pro Tour qualifier event, and here's what I went with, and here's why, and let's discuss the cards that we had in this sealed pool and talk about what cards are good and what's not, as a just kind of grand view or grand look at what cards are actually good in our given colors. So again, thank you guys for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the video. I know it's a lot to sit through, and I appreciate anybody that sat through this entire thing and listened to me talk. I really enjoy Limited. It's definitely my favorite format of play, and the one that I think that I'm personally the most skilled in out of all the formats of Magic. And hopefully we can all get better at this game and better at Limited over time. So again, thank you, and until next time guys, peace out. If you guys want to keep up to date with everything that we have going on here at Absolute MTG, remember to hit that subscribe button, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter for all of your Magic the Gathering needs. Also, remember to check out our sponsors of the channel, MTG Madness and AVUgames.com. But as always, thank you guys for watching.